Hear words of faith from the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 13. Continue to love each other as sisters and brothers. Don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. Keep in mind those who are in prison, as though you were in prison with them. And be mindful of those who are being treated badly, since you know what they are enduring. Let marriage be honoured by everyone, and let the marriage bed be kept undefiled, for God will judge covenant breakers and adulterers. Put the love of money out of your lives and be content with what you have, for God has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. And thus may we say with confidence, God is my helper, and I will not be afraid. What can mere humans do to me? Remember your leaders who preached the word of God to you, and as you reflect on their lives, the outcome of their lives, imitate their faith. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. For words of spiritual insight and encouragement, we give thanks.
Hear words of poetry from the Gospel of John, chapter 17. Jesus is recorded to have said, I don't pray for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all may be one, as you, Abba, are in me and I in you. I pray that they may be one in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. I have given them the glory you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them, you in me, that they may be made perfect in unity, that the world will know that you sent me and that you loved them as you loved me. Abba, I ask that those you gave me may be here with me, so they can see this glory of mine, which is your gift to me, because of the love you had for me before the foundation of the world. Righteous One, the world hasn't known you, but I have, and these people know that you sent me. To them I have revealed your name, and I will continue to reveal it, so that the love you have for me may live in them, just as I may live in them. For sacred words of inspiration, we give thanks.
Hear words of grace from Joan Chichester. There are empty tombs in all our lives still, places where death did not conquer us, because faith entered in to fill the dark spots. We have each risen from the dead, and Christ has risen in us. Yes, the Easter season is about more than the resurrection of Jesus. It is just as much about the resurrection of everyone around him, because of his own. Mary Magdalene rose again, this time a disciple. The apostles rose again, this time with courage and purpose. The little people for whom Jesus' whole ministry had been spent rose again, this time with new conviction and certainty. Rising again is the central message of the Christian tradition.
In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. On this day, 49 years ago, we were on the eve of becoming the uniting church in Australia. It was a heady time. Maybe some of you were there in Sydney Town Hall for the inauguration on the 22nd of June, 1977. One hand over here, any other hands? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, that's wonderful. So many of Pitt Street were there in that huge gathering to start the new entity. Sadly, I was not there. I was on the other side of the world. My only contribution to the inauguration of the Uniting Church was briefing my General Secretary, the boss of the World Council of Churches, who was about to fly to Sydney to preach in the town hall at the inauguration. I was quietly hoping he might take me along to carry his bags, but that did not happen. Little did I guess that just 2.5 years later, I would be installed as General Secretary of this new thing. On this Sunday, every year, the Uniting Church invites us to remember its inauguration. My enthusiasm for this commemoration diminished a little. It was shaken just some years ago. It must have been 2001, I found myself invited to a big event of the Armenian Orthodox Church, the Armenian Apostolic Church. They were going to celebrate an important anniversary, I read. And what was this important anniversary? The recognition of the Armenian Church's faith as the established faith of Armenia. Well, it sounded wonderful. And then I checked the dates. This happened 17 centuries ago, in the year 301. Between 17 centuries and a few decades, there's quite a difference. So when the Uniting Church does its remembering, a healthy dose of humility is in order. We are one of the new kids on the block, and we should not forget that. Which does not mean that remembering should not happen. Recalling where you've come from is important if you're going to be aware of who you are. And I'm not only talking about the story of the Uniting Church, not only about the pre-union stories of Methodism, Presbyterianism, and Congregationalism. I'm talking about the whole story. One weakness of Protestantism, for example, is the way Protestants tend to be aware of the early church and then be aware of the Reformation, but just jump over all those centuries in between. But those centuries are us too. It's all us. 2 millennia of saints and sinners, of strengths and weaknesses, of insights and blind spots, all ours. All of them to be remembered, inspired by, sometimes repented for, always learned from. Now, the website of this congregation, I know, identifies it as a progressive Christian community. Now, progressive is great if it means an openness to welcome all, as our order of service this morning says so well. If it says an openness to all, a readiness to question what we think we know already, a willingness to be unpopular for the sake of the gospel. If that's what progressive entails, great. But being progressive does not mean neglecting where we have come from, neglecting the rich heritage of the past, failing to cherish the things that history has given us. History, things we may not always understand, but which we should cherish so that they may be potentially fruitful for the future. So Pitt Street, be progressive by all means, but at the same time, I ask you, do not fail to be appropriately conservative. In which spirit? In this spirit of progressive conservatism, let's do some looking back. Starting with what we heard a few minutes ago from St. John's Gospel. Jesus, you remember, was praying for his followers and for those who would come after them. I used to wonder, how did the author of John's Gospel know what Jesus was praying? Was he praying aloud? Was somebody hovering around taking shorthand notes? How did they know? Well, of course, they didn't know. They surmised. The author of John's Gospel was using a literary device of the times. When an eminent person died, they would sometimes compose a speech, what he would have said if he'd had the opportunity to say it, what he represented in his life and teaching. And that's what's happening here. The author of John's Gospel has put together a prayer which encapsulates what those early Christians felt Jesus was driving at, what he would have wanted to say as he drew to pray, as he drew near to the end of his life, his betrayal and his execution. So here we don't have a farewell address, we have a farewell prayer, echoing what Jesus had stood for. The bit we heard today, the part of the prayer we've just heard, is often read for ecumenical occasions, perhaps a little too casually read for ecumenical occasions. So let's be clear for starters what the prayer is not asking. Jesus is not asking that his followers should somehow be nice to each other. He's not saying they should join councils of churches. He's not even suggesting that they should muster the wisdom and courage to turn 3 churches into 1. That's not what he's on about. He is praying for unity, but it's a very radical kind of unity, going far beyond structural issues that so often preoccupy us. Jesus is yearning that his followers may cohere, relate to one another with a closeness and intimacy that reflects the unity of the triune God, nothing less. This is language about human relationships, not structures or doctrines, although it has implications for both. It's about people, the Jesus people, and what their lifestyle is going to be like if the world is to believe. Now, remember, whoever wrote these words would have had no illusions. As we know, John's Gospel was written about a century after the birth of Jesus. So the early church had already had a few problems. There had been some tensions over serious issues. And those tensions had not always been handled well. So the author here would have had a very realistic grasp of what being the church entails. People are still human beings, thank God, when they're in the church. And they bring with them all those elements of human nature that can be wonderful, but other elements that can cause problems. They had already learned that following Christ does not mean you're immune to the follies and foibles of human nature, which makes the prayer all the more telling, because it's about a church like ours. It's about Christians like us. And it has implications for things you and I are supposed to know quite a lot about. Things like forgiveness, compassion, endurance, kindness, patience, humility, even things like love. This is what he's talking about. And this is what can so easily get lost sight of. This congregation knows better than most how relationships within a denomination can fray when sensitive issues are up for debate. You have been at the center of some of the most lively discussions the Uniting Church has had in these 49 years. Thank God this congregation is also better than most at finding the spiritual strength with which to cope with difficult times. For that, as we look back, we must always be ready to thank God. But the implications of the Jesus prayer go further. Beyond relationships within a denomination, towards the way our still separated denominations, plural, today should deal with one another. The modern ecumenical movement during the past century went through two phases. First, there was the getting to know you phase, when churches that too often had kept each other at arm's length set about explaining to each other why each believed that it had the essential marks of the church and why others, in its view, were defective. It was a time of self-assertion, clarification, and not always great humility. That was the getting to know you phase. Then came the second, coming to understand you phase. Through dialogues, multilateral and bilateral, the churches gradually corrected the notions they'd had about one another, often to their surprise, discovering substantial areas of common ground. Getting to know you, coming to understand you. Now, both these exercises were helpful. Both of them cleared the decks for the better relationships we have today and for the formation of the uniting church in Australia. Now, I believe the churches of Australia are ready for what must be the next phase. This one, however, marked by confession, forgiveness, and mutual care. I have a picture in my mind with the churches on their knees, each denomination quite specifically confessing its sins, each admitting the distortions wrought by its history, each acknowledging its need for correction and renewal, each seeking help from the others. Above all, each asking God and the others for forgiveness and absolution. If that sounds like something for church leaders and ecumenical high flyers, yes, it probably is. But to be authentic, it will need to reflect the churches themselves and a shift in what is still so often the prevailing spirituality within them. That is to say, to be authentic. A new stage, a new phase in the movement towards Christian unity requires spiritual renewal of us. I have a special memory that I'd like to share with you. A memory about precisely this change within ourselves. It was July 1985. Rolly Bush from Brisbane had just finished a term as the third president of the Uniting Church. Now, during his time, the two archbishops of Brisbane, Catholic and Anglican, had been also heads of their churches. All three, Rolly as president of the Uniting Church, the two archbishops, Anglican and Catholic, were bearing scars from dealing with the Bjelke Petersen government on human rights issues, Aboriginal justice issues, other issues as well. They bore the same scars. They had become very close friends. On a visit to Sydney, Rolly Bush suffered a severe heart attack that was to take his life. He was in St. Vincent's Hospital. The two archbishops found themselves in Sydney for a meeting of national heads of churches, and they called me. Could I arrange for them to visit Rolly in hospital? So I did. My job was transport, and I can tell you, if you want instant attention in St. Vincent's Hospital, The trick is go in with an archbishop at either elbow. I watched as those three old friends talked together, prayed together, remembered together the God they had tried to serve. And I thought, yes, this is what the quest for Christian unity is really about. This is the ecumenical movement at its best. And I thought of that prayer we heard today, especially where it ended. Can you remember the end of that prayer? With Jesus pleading with the Father that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. That's it. Of course, it's daunting, but don't forget, that very special person is still loving us, forgiving us, caring for us, and praying for us. Thanks be to God.